In the winter of 1943, near the Tunisian village of Jebel Azag, a column of 17 American M4 Sherman tanks advanced through the rocky pass toward what intelligence described as light German resistance. Within 11 minutes, 14 of those tanks were burning. The crews who survived reported the same thing, a sound like tearing metal, then fire. They never saw what killed them. The weapon was a WWII, a single tank. And it had fired from a distance the Americans didn't believe possible. The Tiger wasn't just feared, it was misunderstood. Allied tank crews spoke of it the way sailors spoke of storms, inevitable, unstoppable, survivable only through luck. British after-action reports described encounters with Tigers as psychologically devastating. American intelligence briefs called it the most dangerous armored vehicle in the world. Soviet commanders issued standing orders: avoid engagement at all costs. But the fear wasn't irrational. It was mathematical. The Tiger I mounted an 88mm K36L56 gun, a weapon originally designed for anti-aircraft use, then repurposed for armor penetration. At 1,000 meters, it could punch through 120 millimeters of sloped armor. The Sherman's frontal armor was 76 millimeters, the Soviet T-34's was 45 millimeters. The Tiger could kill them before they even knew it was there. The Allies had nothing that could match it. Not in 1942, not in 1943, not even in early 1944. The gun alone weighed over 1 ton. Its breech mechanism was hydraulically assisted. Its optics were Zeiss manufactured, offering clarity at ranges beyond 2 kilometers. The Tiger's gunner could identify hull numbers on enemy tanks from distances where those same crews couldn't see the Tiger at all. But the gun was only part of the problem. The Tiger weighed 56 tons, more than twice the weight of a Sherman. Its armor was 100 millimeters thick at the front, angled at near vertical. Allied tanks had to close to within 300 meters to have any chance of penetration. By then, they were already dead. The Tiger's Maybach HL-230 P45 engine produced 700 horsepower, but the tank's weight meant it consumed fuel at catastrophic rates. It could travel just over 100 kilometers on a full tank. Its transmission, an 8-speed Maybach Olvar, was so complex that field repairs often took days. Its interleaved road wheels clogged with mud and froze solid in winter. The Tiger was a nightmare to maintain, but on the battlefield it was a fortress that moved and killed. Allied intelligence knew all of this. They had recovered disabled Tigers. They had interrogated captured crews. They had studied the schematics, the metallurgy, the ballistics, and they reached a conclusion that paralyzed tank design for 2 years. We cannot build this. The Tiger wasn't just over-engineered. It was impossibly engineered. It required precision manufacturing tolerances that Allied factories couldn't meet at scale. It demanded rare alloys that were already in short supply. It needed specialized training for crews, mechanics, and logistics officers. The Allies could have built a Tiger, but they couldn't have built 10,000 of them, and that's what war demanded, so they didn't try. Instead, they built 75,000 Shermans, 40,000 T-34s, thousands of Cromwells, Churchills, and Valentines. Tanks that were cheaper, faster to produce, easier to repair. Tanks that could be replaced. The Tiger could not be replaced. Germany built 347 Tiger between 1942 and 1944. Each one took twice as long to manufacture as a Sherman. Each one required components that could have built 3 Panzer IVs. Each one was a strategic contradiction, unstoppable in battle, unsustainable in war. The Allies knew this, and they planned accordingly. British doctrine evolved. Avoid Tigers, call in artillery, wait for air support. American tactics became numerical. Send 5 Shermans for every Tiger, accept the losses, win through attrition. Soviet strategy was blunt: encircle, disable the tracks, burn it with Molotovs. But the fear remained, even when the numbers favored the Allies, even when Tigers broke down more often than they fought, even when fuel shortages left them abandoned on roadsides. The psychological effect never faded. A single Tiger could hold a bridge for hours. A platoon of 3 could stop an armored brigade. The mere rumor of Tigers in an area caused Allied commanders to halt advances and call for reconnaissance. The weapon had become myth. But myths are built on truth. And the truth was this: the Tiger I represented the apex of a philosophy that prioritized quality over quantity, precision over pragmatism, engineering perfection over industrial reality. It was a tank designed to win battles. The Allies built tanks designed to win wars. And in the calculus of industrial conflict, only one approach could survive. But in the winter of 1943, in a rocky pass near Jebel Azag, that calculus didn't matter. 14 Sherman crews burned because they faced a weapon their own tanks could never match. The Tiger wasn't just a tank, it was the sound of steel meeting steel and breaking. The 80mm KWK-36L56 wasn't designed to kill tanks. It was designed to kill bombers at 10,000 meters. That it became the most feared anti-tank weapon of the war was an accident, or rather an act of industrial improvisation that Allied engineers spent 3 years trying to replicate. They failed. In September 1943, a Tiger WII was captured intact near Tunis. British intelligence transported it to the School of Tank Technology in Chobham under total secrecy. The tank was disassembled, measured, photographed, and tested. Every component was catalogued. The gun was fired over 200 times under controlled conditions. The report that followed was 73 pages long. Its conclusion was 3 words: not replicable, abandon. The problem wasn't just the gun, it was everything the gun required to function. The 80mm fired a shell weighing 10 kilograms at 773 meters per second. The barrel was 4.93 meters long, precision bored to tolerances of 0.0 millimeters. The rifling consisted of 32 grooves cut in a right-hand twist at a rate of 1 turn per 30 calibers. The chamber pressure at firing exceeded 3,300 bar. British metallurgists couldn't reproduce the barrel steel. It wasn't simple chromium-molybdenum alloy. It was a proprietary German blend, incorporating trace amounts of vanadium and tungsten, heat-treated in stages under controlled atmospheres. The manufacturing process required specialized ovens that Britain didn't have. American engineers faced the same problem. The M1 76mm gun, installed in late-model Shermans, could penetrate 92mm of armor at 1,000 meters. The Tiger's gun could penetrate 120 meters. The difference sounds marginal. In combat, it was absolute. The Americans tried boring out 90mm anti-aircraft guns to 88mm. The barrels cracked after 50 rounds. They tried reverse engineering captured German shells. The propellant formula was unknown. Chemical analysis revealed 17 distinct compounds, 3 of which couldn't be identified. The Soviets took a different approach. They captured 12 Tiger IIs between 1943 and 1944 and studied them at the Kubinka proving grounds. Their conclusion: copy nothing. Instead, they designed the 122mm D-25T gun for the IS-2 heavy tank, a weapon with lower muzzle velocity but a shell heavy enough to crack the Tiger's armor through sheer kinetic mass. It worked. But it wasn't the same. The Tiger's gun wasn't just powerful, it was accurate. At 1,500 meters, experienced Tiger gunners could hit a 1-meter target 9 times out of 10. Sherman gunners, at the same range, were lucky to hit twice. The difference wasn't training, it was optics. The Tiger used a Turmzil Fernrohr 9B telescopic sight, manufactured by Zeiss. It offered 2.5x magnification with a field of view of 23 degrees. The reticle was etched, not painted. The lenses were multi-coated to reduce glare. The sight was nitrogen-sealed to prevent fogging. Allied optics couldn't match it. British tank sights used commercial-grade glass. American sights fogged in cold weather. Soviet sights were functional but crude, effective at 500 meters, useless beyond 1,000. The Tiger's gunner could see what others couldn't, and what he saw, he killed. But the gun's lethality created a second problem: logistics. Each 80-meter shell weighed 10 kilograms. A Tiger carried 92 rounds, 920 kilograms of ammunition. Resupply required specialized trucks, cranes, and crews trained in handling the shells without damaging the brass casings. A single damaged casing could jam the breech. A jammed breech in combat meant death. The Allies didn't have this problem. Sherman crews could reload from crates stacked outside the tank. T-34 crews carried spare rounds in external bins. The Tiger's ammunition storage was internal, protected by armor, but inaccessible during field operations. The gun made the Tiger lethal, but it also made the Tiger fragile. Now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what moments of day or night these documented accounts reach. When a Tiger's transmission failed, and it often did, the gun became useless. When fuel ran out, the gun became a fixed artillery piece. When spare parts didn't arrive, the gun sat silent. The 88mm KWK-36 was the most effective anti-tank weapon of World War II, but effectiveness in industrial war is measured by availability, and the Tiger's gun was never available enough. Allied intelligence knew this by late 1943. They stopped trying to match the gun and started counting how many Tigers Germany could actually field. The answer was not enough. By 1944, the Allies were producing tanks at a rate of 3,000 per month. Germany was producing 60 Tigers per month, and half of those never reached the front due to mechanical failure or fuel shortages. The gun that couldn't be copied became the gun that didn't need to be copied, but that knowledge came too late for the crews who faced it. In the Ardennes, in Normandy, in the Russian steppes, wherever the 80mm fired, men died before they understood what had killed them. The Tiger's gun didn't just penetrate armor. It penetrated the illusion that industrial war could be won by engineering alone. The Tiger WII's frontal armor was 100mm thick, face-hardened steel, angled at 9 degrees from vertical. It could withstand direct hits from every Allied tank gun in service between 1942 and mid-1944. The problem wasn't that the Allies couldn't penetrate it. The problem was that building armor like this required an industrial infrastructure the Allies had, and chose not to use. The decision wasn't technical, it was philosophical. In November 1943, a memorandum circulated through the U.S. War Department's Ordnance Division. It was marked "Restricted" and titled "Assessment of German Heavy Tank Armor Production Methods." The document was 12 pages long. Its core conclusion appeared on page 7. The Tiger's armor represents a manufacturing dead end. Replication is feasible, mass production is not. The memo explained why. The Tiger's armor plates were forged, not cast. Each plate was heated to 950 degrees, hammered into shape under hydraulic presses, generating 10,000 tons of force, then quenched in oil baths to achieve surface hardness while maintaining interior ductility. The process took 6 hours per plate. A single Tiger required 14 major plates. American tank production relied on casting, pouring molten steel into molds. A Sherman's hull could be cast in 90 minutes. The armor was thicker in some places, up to 89 limits on late models, but it was softer, more brittle, and prone to spalling when struck by high-velocity rounds. British Churchills used a hybrid approach, cast hulls with bolted-on armor plates. The plates were effective, but the bolts created weak points. A direct hit near a seam could shatter the weld and send fragments into the crew compartment. Soviet T-34s used sloped cast armor, 45mm thick, angled at 60 degrees, effectively doubling its protective value through deflection geometry. It was brilliant design, but it wasn't Tiger armor. The difference wasn't just thickness, it was quality. German metallurgists used a nickel-chromium-molybdenum alloy specification known as Panzerstahl, armor steel. The exact formula varied by manufacturer, but the standard included 0.3% carbon, 3% nickel, 1.5% chromium, and trace molybdenum. The steel was smelted in electric arc furnaces, expensive, slow, but capable of producing homogeneous metal free of impurities. Allied steel was smelted in open hearth furnaces, faster, cheaper, but inconsistent. British metallurgical reports from 1944 noted that Sherman armor plates from different foundries showed hardness variations of up to 15%. Some plates shattered on impact, others held. There was no way to predict which. The Tiger's armor was predictable. Every plate met the same specification. Every plate was tested. Every plate was hardened to 260 Brinell on the exterior surface, 220 Brinell at the core. This was an accident. It was industrial discipline that the Allies couldn't or wouldn't replicate at scale. In early 1944, the U.S. Army tested a prototype heavy tank called the T-29. It mounted 105mm frontal armor, thicker than the Tiger's. The armor was cast using improved techniques developed at the Watertown Arsenal. Ballistic tests showed it could stop 80mm rounds at 1,000 meters. The T-29 never entered production. The reason appeared in a cost analysis dated March 1944. Each T-29 required 320 man-hours of specialized welding compared to 140 hours for a Sherman. The steel alone cost $4,200 per tank, nearly double the Sherman's material cost. And the United States was already producing 500 Shermans per week. Building better tanks would have meant building fewer tanks, and fewer tanks meant losing the war. The British reached the same conclusion with the A-43 Black Prince, a Churchill variant with 150mm frontal armor. It could survive Tiger fire at close range. It was also so heavy that its suspension collapsed during trials. The project was cancelled in June 1944. The Soviets, characteristically, took a different path. They didn't try to match the Tiger's armor. They built the IS-2 with 120mm frontal armor angled at 60 degrees, effectively 240 meters against direct fire. It worked, but the IS-2 weighed 46 tons and required a 600-horsepower engine. The Soviets built 3,400 of them. Germany built 347 Tigers. The numbers told the story. Germany's armor philosophy prioritized crew survival and battlefield dominance. Every Tiger crew knew their tank could take hits that would destroy anything else. That confidence translated into aggression, into willingness to engage at close range, into tactical flexibility. But confidence required steel, and steel required time. Each Tiger consumed 40,000 kilograms of armor-grade steel. In 1943, Germany produced 1,000 Tigers. That's 40 million kilograms of steel, enough to build 2,500 Panzer IVs, or 5,000 half-tracks, or 300,000 machine guns. The Allies knew this. British intelligence calculated that every Tiger on the battlefield represented 3 Panzer IVs that didn't exist. Every hour spent forging Tiger armor was an hour not spent building trucks, artillery tractors, or ammunition. The Tiger's armor was militarily superior, but it was strategically suicidal. By late 1944, German industry could no longer supply the raw materials for Tiger production. Nickel shipments from Finland stopped. Chromium imports from Turkey dried up. Factories switched to lower-grade steel, reducing hardness and increasing brittleness. Tigers built in 1945 had armor that cracked under stress. Some plates failed quality testing and were installed anyway. Crews reported that late-war Tigers felt different, thinner, weaker, more vulnerable. The armor that once symbolized invincibility became a symbol of collapse. But in 1943, before the shortages, before the compromises, the Tiger's armor represented something the Allies couldn't afford to build: perfection in a war that demanded mass. The armor didn't just protect the crew, it protected the myth that engineering alone could win battles, even as the factories that built it ran out of time. The Tiger WII's Maybach-Olver transmission was an 8-speed gearbox weighing 750 kilograms. It featured epicyclic steering, hydraulic shifting, and pre-selector mechanisms that allowed the driver to change gears without declutching. It was the most advanced tank transmission in the world. It was also the most fragile. Between 1942 and 1945, more Tigers were abandoned due to transmission failure than were destroyed by enemy action. This wasn't Allied propaganda. This was German field data. A directive issued by the Wehrmacht's 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion in July 1943 stated, "Mechanical reliability remains the primary operational constraint. Engagement protocols must account for 40% non-combat mobility loss, 40%, before a shot was fired." The Maybach-Olver wasn't inherently defective. It was over-engineered for a vehicle that exceeded its design parameters. The transmission was rated for a 45-ton tank. The Tiger weighed 56 tons. The additional load created stress fractures in the gear teeth, particularly in third and fourth gears, the most used ratios during combat maneuvering. The problem compounded under field conditions. The transmission required specialist-grade hypoid oil, changed every 600 kilometers. In North Africa, sand contamination reduced that interval to 300 kilometers. On the Eastern Front, temperatures below 20 degrees C caused the oil to thicken into sludge, seizing the gears. In Italy's mountain passes, constant uphill driving burned out the clutch packs within weeks. German logistics couldn't supply replacement transmissions fast enough. Each unit required 200 man-hours to manufacture and weighed 3/4 of a ton, too heavy for field workshops to install without cranes. A disabled Tiger often sat immobile for days, while mechanics waited for parts that never arrived. Allied intelligence officers noticed this early. A British report from Tunisia, dated March 1943, observed, "Enemy heavy tanks frequently abandoned intact along roadsides. Examination reveals no combat damage. Probable cause, mechanical failure." The Americans reached the same conclusion. After-action reports from Normandy documented 19 Tigers found abandoned between June 6th and June 20th, 1944. 12 showed no signs of combat. 7 had holes drilled through their engine blocks, standard German practice to prevent capture of functional vehicles. But the engines were fine. The transmissions had failed. Soviet intelligence went further. They recovered 11 intact Tigers from the Kursk salient and tested them at Kubinka. The results appeared in a confidential summary dated November 1943. Average operational range before transmission failure, 150 kilometers. Conclusion: German heavy tank unsuitable for extended offensive operations. 150 kilometers, less than the distance from Moscow to Tula. The irony wasn't lost on German field commanders. In a letter dated August 1944, SS Obersturmbannführer Heinz von Westernhagen wrote, "We possess the most powerful tank in the world. We cannot drive it more than 2 days without breakdown." The transmission's complexity was the root cause. The Maybach-Olver used a pre-selector system. The driver chose the next gear, then engaged it via a hydraulic servo when ready. This allowed for smooth, fast shifts without interrupting power to the tracks. In theory. In practice, the system required 3 separate oil circuits, one for lubrication, one for hydraulic actuation, one for cooling. A leak in any circuit caused catastrophic failure, and the seals, rubber compounds designed for temperate climates, deteriorated rapidly in extreme heat or cold. Field mechanics improvised. They packed the seals with grease to slow degradation. They overfilled the oil reservoirs to compensate for leaks. They bypassed the pre-selector and forced manual shifts, destroying the synchronizers in the process. None of it worked for long. The Tiger's operational tempo reflected this fragility. Wehrmacht doctrine called for Tigers to be deployed in concentrated Schwerpunkt, focal point attacks, short, violent engagements where mechanical endurance mattered less than firepower. The Tiger would advance, engage, destroy, then withdraw to a maintenance area. This worked in 1943, when Germany still controlled logistics networks and repair facilities. It collapsed in 1944, when Allied air superiority made daytime movement suicidal and retreat routes were bombed into rubble. Tigers became trapped, not by enemy fire, but by their own immobility. In the Falaise Pocket, August 1944, 12 Tigers from the 12th SS Panzer Division were abandoned with functioning guns and intact armor. Their transmissions had seized after 3 days of continuous operation. The crews destroyed them with explosive charges and retreated on foot. In the Ardennes offensive, December 1944, Kampfgruppe Piper, equipped with 39 Tigers and King Tigers, advanced 60 kilometers before running out of fuel. 14 of those tanks had already thrown tracks or suffered transmission failure. They were blown up by their own crews. The Tiger's transmission didn't just fail mechanically, it failed strategically. Germany had built a weapon that required perfect conditions to function: smooth roads, ample fuel, nearby repair facilities, specialist mechanics, constant resupply. The Eastern Front offered none of this. Normandy offered none of this. Italy offered none of this. The Allies, by contrast, built tanks that could be repaired by crew members with basic tools. A Sherman's transmission could be swapped in 4 hours using a field jack and a winch. A T-34's transmission was so simple that frontline infantry units performed replacements using logs as levers. The Tiger required a factory, and by 1944 the factories were rubble. German engineers knew the transmission was a failure point. In late 1943, Henschel proposed a simplified 6-speed gearbox for the Tiger II. It was rejected, too late to retool production, and the simplified design sacrificed the hydraulic steering that made the Tiger maneuverable despite its weight. So they kept building the Maybach Olvar, and it kept failing. By the war's end, more than 500 Tigers had been abandoned due to mechanical failure, over 1/3 of total production. The crews didn't surrender, they didn't retreat under fire. They simply walked away from machines that could no longer move. The Tiger's transmission was a masterpiece of engineering, but in war, masterpieces that break are just expensive failures. The Tiger I consumed 470 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers on roads. Off-road, that figure doubled. In combat, constant acceleration, emergency braking, sharp turns, the tank could burn through its entire 540-liter fuel capacity in under 2 hours. This wasn't a design flaw, it was thermodynamic inevitability. The Maybach HL 230 P45 engine produced 700 horsepower by burning fuel at a rate that would have been unsustainable, even if Germany had won every oil field in the Caucasus. The Tiger's power-to-weight ratio was impressive for its mass, but the energy required to move 56 tons of steel through mud, snow, or sand was simply beyond what any petroleum-based fuel system could sustain at scale. Allied planners understood this before the first Tiger ever saw combat. A U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey report from October 1943 stated, "German heavy tank operational radius is limited not by mechanical endurance, but by fuel availability. Disruption of synthetic fuel production should render heavy armor units immobile within 6 months." The prediction was conservative. It took 4 months. Germany's oil situation was catastrophic by 1944. Domestic production provided only 15% of military fuel needs. The rest came from synthetic fuel plants, coal liquefaction facilities scattered across the Ruhr and Silesia. These plants were massive, immobile, and utterly vulnerable to strategic bombing. In May 1944, the U.S. 8th Air Force began Operation Point Blank, targeting synthetic fuel production. Within 3 months, Germany's fuel output dropped by 90%. By September, panzer divisions were receiving 30% of their required fuel allocation. By December, some units received none. The Tiger became a fixed fortification. Field reports from late 1944 described Tigers positioned at crossroads, dug in like pillboxes, immobile but still lethal. Crews would idle the engines for 10 minutes each morning to prevent the oil from congealing, then shut down to conserve fuel. Some tanks sat inactive for weeks, fired only when Allied columns came within range. If you found this story surprising, go ahead and leave a like to support the channel. The fuel crisis exposed a fundamental miscalculation in German armor doctrine. The Tiger was designed for blitzkrieg, rapid, deep penetrations supported by mobile logistics. But blitzkrieg required fuel reserves that Germany never possessed. Soviet intelligence had calculated this in 1942. A Red Army analysis estimated that sustained Tiger operations required 12,000 liters of fuel per tank per month. Germany's synthetic fuel plants at peak production could supply 300,000 tons per month, enough for 25,000 Tigers operating continuously. Germany built 1,247 Tigers, and it still couldn't fuel them. The math was brutal. A single Tiger company, 9 tanks, required 4,200 liters per day during active operations. That's 126,000 liters per month, or roughly 100 tons of fuel. A single heavy tank battalion, 3 companies plus headquarters, needed 300 tons monthly. Germany fielded 10 heavy tank battalions at peak strength. That's 3,000 tons of fuel per month just for Tigers, roughly 1% of total monthly production. It sounds manageable. But fuel had to be shared with fighters, bombers, trucks, half-tracks, reconnaissance vehicles, and the entire logistical network that kept armies functional. There was never enough. Captured German fuel logs from the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion show the collapse in detail. In June 1944, the battalion received 94% of its fuel allocation. In July, 61%. In August, 38%. By September, fuel deliveries had stopped entirely. The battalion's Tigers were destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. The Allies faced no such constraints. American logistics delivered 12 million tons of fuel to Europe between June 1944 and May 1945. A Sherman consumed 250 liters per 100 kilometers, half the Tiger's consumption. And the US produced 50 Shermans for every Tiger Germany built. The fuel disparity was strategic, but it was also tactical. Tigers required high-octane fuel, 87-octane minimum, ideally 92. Lower grades caused engine knocking, reduced power output, and increased the risk of cylinder damage. Soviet T-34s ran on 70-octane fuel. Shermans used 80-octane. Both could, in emergencies, run on captured German fuel. The Tiger couldn't run on captured Allied fuel. It was too low grade. This created a logistical trap. German supply convoys carrying Tiger fuel became priority targets for Allied airstrikes. The convoys traveled at night, without headlights, along cratered roads under constant threat of attack. Many never arrived. Those that did often delivered contaminated fuel, diesel mixed with gasoline, water mixed with both, barrels corroded from months in storage. Contaminated fuel destroyed engines faster than combat. A report from the 3rd SS Panzer Division noted that 7 Tigers were rendered non-operational in October 1944 due to fuel contamination. More than were lost to enemy fire that month. The Tiger's fuel dependency became a weapon the Allies didn't need to fire. By early 1945, German units were ordered to siphon fuel from disabled vehicles to keep a few tanks operational. A photograph from the Remagen bridgehead shows a Tiger surrounded by 6 burned-out Panzer WIIs. The IVs had been drained of fuel to keep the Tiger mobile. The Tiger was destroyed by American artillery 3 hours later. The fuel that powered the Tiger was the same fuel that powered Germany's war economy. And when that economy collapsed under bombing, blockade, and overextension, the Tiger became a 56-ton monument to unsustainability. The gun could still kill. The armor could still protect. But without fuel, the Tiger was just steel waiting to rust. The war ended, not because Germany ran out of tanks. It ended because it ran out of the fuel to move them. A Tiger I required a crew of 5, commander, gunner, loader, driver, radio operator. Training a full crew to operational proficiency took 6 months. By 1944, Germany was losing Tiger crews faster than it could train replacements. The Tiger wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was a human one. In January 1943, the Wehrmacht established the Panzer Training School at Paderborn, specifically for heavy tank crews. The curriculum was exhaustive: gunnery, navigation, radio operation, mechanical repair, tactical doctrine. Crews trained on captured French tanks, then on early model Panzer IVs, before finally transitioning to the Tiger. The washout rate was 40%. Not because the men lacked skill, but because the Tiger demanded a level of coordination that most crews couldn't achieve under stress. A Tiger commander had to manage 5 tasks simultaneously: read the battlefield, direct the driver, coordinate with the gunner, communicate with other tanks via radio, and monitor the mechanical status of his vehicle. A single mistake, misreading terrain, misjudging distance, ordering the wrong gear, could immobilize the tank or expose it to flanking fire. The gunner's role was equally demanding. The 80mm gun recoiled with enough force to injure an unprepared loader. The breech mechanism required precise timing: load, lock, fire, eject, with no room for hesitation. A slow loader meant a slow rate of fire. A slow rate of fire against multiple targets meant death. The driver operated 8 forward gears and 4 reverse gears, plus a complex steering system that required constant throttle adjustments to prevent track wear. Driving a Tiger wasn't like driving a truck. It was like piloting a ship through shallow water, every movement deliberate, every correction calculated. And the radio operator had to do all of this while monitoring 3 radio frequencies, decoding messages, and operating the hull machine gun. The coordination required was inhuman, and by 1944, the men being sent to crew Tigers weren't trained, they were drafted. A report from the 505th Heavy Panzer Battalion, dated November 1944, noted replacement crews arriving with less than 8 weeks training, mechanical knowledge insufficient, gunnery skills inadequate, losses unsustainable. The Tiger was designed for elite crews. By late war, it was being crewed by teenagers. The average age of a Tiger crewman in 1943 was 26. By 1945, it was 19. Boys who had never driven a car were being taught to operate a 56-ton tank in combat conditions. Boys who had never fired a rifle were being trained to use an 80mm gun. They died quickly. Soviet after-action reports from the Battle of Kursk described disabled Tigers with dead crews still inside, killed not by penetrating fire, but by spalling. The armor held, but the kinetic shock from repeated hits caused fragments to break off the interior surface, turning the crew compartment into a shrapnel storm. Experienced crews knew to wear padded headgear and avoid leaning against the armor. New crews didn't. They died from wounds that never breached the hull. The Allies targeted Tiger crews with a ruthlessness that bordered on systematic. British tank doctrine by late 1943 emphasized crew attrition over vehicle destruction. The logic was simple. Disabled Tigers could be repaired. Dead crews couldn't be replaced. American tank destroyers used the same approach. The M10 and M36, mounting 76mm and 90mm guns respectively, couldn't reliably penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor. But they could disable tracks, optics, and vision ports. Once immobilized, the Tiger became a target for artillery, airstrikes, or flamethrower-equipped infantry. The crew had two choices: bail out and surrender, or stay inside and burn. Most chose to burn. German doctrine prohibited Tiger crews from abandoning their vehicles unless ordered by a superior officer. The logic was strategic. An intact Tiger, even immobilized, was a psychological weapon. Its presence on the battlefield forced Allied units to commit resources, call in air support, delay advances. But the cost was measured in lives. A study of Tiger crew casualties from the 1st SS Panzer Corps showed that 68% of crew deaths occurred after the tank was immobilized. The men stayed inside, following orders, while Allied infantry methodically destroyed vision ports, machine gun mounts, and ventilation hatches with small arms fire. By the time the crew decided to evacuate, it was too late. The survivors, those who bailed out in time, who weren't killed during egress, who made it to German lines, were often too traumatized to return to combat. A psychiatric evaluation of 18 Tiger crewmen conducted in March 1945 found that 14 exhibited symptoms consistent with what modern medicine would call combat stress reaction: auditory hallucinations, the sound of shells hitting armor; hypervigilance, refusal to enter enclosed spaces. They were reassigned to infantry units. Most died within weeks. The Tiger required not just trained crews, but experienced crews, men who had survived enough engagements to develop battlefield instincts, who knew when to advance and when to withdraw, who could recognize the difference between a ricochet and a penetration by sound alone. By 1944, those men were gone. The Tiger battalions that fought in Normandy had an average crew experience of 6 weeks. The battalions that fought at Kursk had averaged 2 years. The difference was measurable in survival rates. Kursk-era crews had a 40% survival rate per engagement. Normandy-era crews had 12%. The Tiger had become a death trap, crewed by the inexperienced and the doomed. German training schools tried to compensate by shortening the curriculum, focusing on essential skills only. Gunnery training was reduced from 12 weeks to 4. Mechanical training was cut from 8 weeks to 2. Radio operation was often skipped entirely. Crews were told to learn on the job. The result was predictable. Tigers broke down because drivers didn't understand the transmission. Tigers were destroyed because gunners couldn't range accurately. Tigers were surrounded because radio operators couldn't call for support. The Tiger's technical superiority became irrelevant when the men operating it didn't know how. In March 1945, a Tiger from the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion was found abandoned near the Remagen Bridge. The tank was intact. The engine was running. The crew had fled after the driver accidentally shifted into reverse during combat and couldn't figure out how to shift forward again. The Americans photographed it. The image circulated through Allied intelligence with a one-word caption: unsustainable. The Tiger wasn't defeated by better tanks or superior numbers. It was defeated by the collapse of the system that created the men who could operate it. The last operational Tiger I fired its final shot on May 7, 1945, near the town of Amstetten, Austria. The target was a Soviet T-34 at a range of 1,200 meters. The shell penetrated. The T-34 burned. 30 minutes later, the Tiger's crew destroyed their vehicle with demolition charges and surrendered to American forces. The war ended. The Tiger did not. By 1946, every major Allied power had acquired at least one captured Tiger for testing and display. The British sent theirs to Bovington. The Americans sent theirs to Aberdeen Proving Ground. The Soviets kept 12 at Kubinka. Each was studied, photographed, and dissected. The technical reports were unanimous. The Tiger represented the pinnacle of tank design circa 1942. It was also obsolete by the standards of 1946, but the myth had already solidified. In the immediate post-war period, Allied veterans wrote memoirs describing tiger encounters in apocalyptic terms. British tanker Ken Tout wrote, "Seeing a tiger was like seeing God, inevitable, overwhelming, and likely fatal." American historian Belton Cooper claimed that 5 Shermans were lost for every tiger destroyed. Soviet accounts described tigers as fortresses on tracks. None of this was entirely accurate, but accuracy didn't matter. The tiger had become legend. The mythology served multiple purposes. For Allied veterans, it explained defeats without admitting tactical failures. For German veterans, it preserved a sense of technical and martial superiority in the face of overwhelming defeat. For post-war audiences, it provided a clear symbol of Nazi engineering prowess and Allied industrial triumph over it. The tiger became shorthand for the entire German war machine, powerful, fearsome, ultimately unsustainable. Historians began quantifying the myth in the 1950s. Analyzing battle reports, loss records, and after-action summaries revealed the statistical reality. Tigers destroyed an estimated 9,150 Allied and Soviet tanks between 1942 and 1945. That's an average of 7.3 kills per tiger. The Allies lost 42,000 tanks during the same period. The tiger accounted for roughly 23% of those losses, disproportionately high for a vehicle that represented less than 2% of German armor production. But the 7-3 kill ratio was deeply misleading. It included every tank destroyed near a tiger, whether or not the tiger actually fired the killing shot. It counted vehicles abandoned due to mechanical failure as lost in combat. It ignored the fact that many tigers never saw action, breaking down en route to the front. A more accurate figure, accounting only for confirmed tiger gun kills, put the ratio closer to 4-1. Still impressive, but not mythical. The Soviets reached a different conclusion. A post-war analysis by the Red Army's Armored Directorate calculated that tigers inflicted 80% of their total losses during the first 6 months of deployment, before Soviet crews learned to counter them. After mid-1943, the kill ratio dropped to 2.5-1. The tiger's lethality wasn't inherent, it was circumstantial, a function of surprise, superior optics, and enemy inexperience. Once those factors disappeared, the tiger became just another target. But the myth didn't care about statistics. By the 1960s, the tiger had entered popular culture. Films like Battle of the Bulge depicted single tigers destroying entire American convoys. Novels described tiger crews as elite warriors, technical savants, tragic heroes. Model kits sold in the millions. The tiger became one of the most recognizable military vehicles in history, more famous than the Sherman, more iconic than the T-34. The irony is that the tiger's fame derived from its failures as much as its successes. The tiger was over-engineered, underproduced, mechanically fragile, logistically unsustainable, and strategically counterproductive. It consumed resources that could have built hundreds of more practical tanks. It broke down more often than it fought. It was abandoned more often than it was destroyed, and yet, the tiger represented something that post-war tank design couldn't replicate. The idea that a single vehicle, crewed by 5 men, could dominate a battlefield through sheer technical superiority. Modern tanks are faster, lighter, more reliable, but none inspire the same mixture of dread and admiration. The US M1 Abrams, by any objective measure, is a superior tank to the Tiger. It's faster, better armored, equipped with thermal optics and depleted uranium rounds. It has never suffered a crew fatality from enemy tank fire. But no one writes legends about the Abrams. The Tiger's legacy isn't its kill ratio or its armor thickness. It's the psychological imprint it left on an entire generation of soldiers who faced it and couldn't forget. Soviet veterans interviewed in the 1980s still describe Tigers with a mixture of fear and respect. American tankers, attending reunions 60 years after the war, still recounted their first Tiger engagement as the worst day of their lives. British historians still debate whether Normandy could have been won faster if the Tiger battalions had been better supplied. The Tiger became the measure by which all other tanks were judged, not because it was the best, but because it felt the most dangerous. In 2025, only 7 Tigers remain in running condition worldwide. Museums preserve them as relics of industrial ambition and strategic miscalculation. Restorers spend years sourcing parts that no longer exist, rebuilding transmissions using modern materials, fueling engines with synthetic blends that approximate 1940s German gasoline. The Tiger runs again, but only in controlled environments for brief demonstrations under constant mechanical supervision. Even now, it cannot sustain itself. The Tiger, I was never the weapon Germany needed. It was the weapon Germany wanted, a symbol of technological dominance in a war that would be decided by industrial endurance. It killed thousands, it terrified millions, and it changed nothing. But the myth survives. Because in war, as in memory, fear lasts longer than steel. Subscribe to our channel to explore more documented and haunting stories from the machinery of war. Thank you for following this account of the Tiger WII. We'll see you in the next video.